Welcome back, my family. Before we jump into today's horror stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Your comments and likes really help YouTube push our video and show you even more stories. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop your answers and suggestions in the comments, and who knows, I might give you a shout out in the next video. Thank you for being here and for all your amazing support. About 2 winters ago, my husband and I bought a small farm and moved to a quiet town in Appalachia. It was a big life change for us, but we'd been saving and dreaming about a quieter type of life for a while. Things were still new to us, and we were just figuring out how to live more independently. That meant learning where to get propane, feed, hardware, a lot of things we'd never really had to deal with before. One day, we went to our local tractor supply to pick up a propane tank. It was cold out and the place wasn't very busy. We figured that it'd be a quick in and out. While we were standing in line to check out, this man walked in behind us. He looked like he was in his late 50s, older, scruffy, kind of had that weathered look that some people get from working outside a lot. He walked in the door, and the moment he saw us, he just stared. Like, full-on stared, almost like he was trying to place us. Then, without really looking, he grabbed some random woman's shirt off one of the shelves and walked right over to stand behind us in line. And when I say behind us, I mean way too close. He was practically breathing on my neck. It instantly made me feel uncomfortable. Although I tried to brush it off, told myself that it's just a small town and maybe people don't think twice about personal space around here. So I turned around, gave him a quick smile, nodded, and said, "Good morning," hoping that it would kind of give him a clue that he was crowding me. Didn't work. Instead, he took it as reason to start talking. At first, it was a lot of harmless small talk. Things like, "Sure, it's cold out today," or "This line's taking forever." Something about needing to pick up his great aunt from the airport in a couple of hours. Then he started asking questions that felt a little too personal. "Where are you guys from? Where are you living now? How old are y'all?" For context, even though I was in my late 20s and my husband just a few years younger, we both have pretty young faces, that baby face gene. People often assume we're 20, maybe 21. It felt like this guy was trying to figure something out, and the tone of his question started to make me a little uneasy. When it was finally our turn to check out, I told him, "Have a great day," and turned toward the cashier, hoping that that would be the end of this interaction. But of course it wasn't. As the teenage kid behind the register started explaining propane pricing, this man behind us lost it. He raised his voice saying stuff like, "Oh, I can't believe y'all are charging them that much for a propane tank. And they're a young, newlywed couple. Why can't you just give them a break?" He wasn't even talking to us anymore, just laying into this poor teenager working his weekend shift. That's when he turned back to us and said, "Hey, I've got a 100-pound tank at my house that I'm not using. You guys can have it if you want it. You just got to come with me to get it." My husband politely said no, but the guy pushed again. "You sure? My place is only 20 minutes from here. I could give you 2 tanks. Again, my husband said no, thanking him, but clearly not interested. That's when the man said something that didn't click with us until much later. "Come on, we just have to go now, though. I'm heading to the airport to go out of town in a couple of hours," which was strange considering earlier he said that he was picking up someone from the airport. At that point, I stepped in and said, "No, thank you," just in a firmer tone. He didn't say anything else, just tossed the shirt that he'd grabbed onto a shelf nearby and walked out of the store. Now, at this point, I thought that was it. I was sure of it. But as we headed outside to get our tank filled, we saw this man's pickup truck parked right next to the propane fill area. He got out and walked right up to us again, acting like nothing weird had just happened inside. He started in again. "You should really think about getting a second take. It'll save you a trip later." I took that opportunity to again say, "No, thank you. We're good." That's when he flashed a smile that still makes me shudder to think about. He said, "Come on, it's a small town. It's safe. I'd never heard such a lovely young couple. Right about this point, one of the employees from the station came out and told the man to get the hell out of there, to stop bothering us. The man didn't argue. He got back in his truck and drove off. We caught one more unsettling detail just as he left the parking lot. This man's truck didn't have any license plates on it. Well, a couple days back, we end up back at our Tractor Supply yet again, filling up a propane tank. The employee helping us remembered the entire situation. He asked us if we'd ever seen that guy again. Apparently, this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. That guy tends to come around every winter, always when the town is quiet, and he only ever attempts to speak to young couples. Major creep vibes. Best case scenario, all that was waiting for us at this man's house was a propane tank. Worst case scenario, well, that's something that I don't want to cost myself any sleep by thinking about. A quick announcement here. If you're still here and enjoying these stories but haven't subscribed yet, please take a second to do so. Drop a comment too. It really helps push the video out to more people. Your support means everything, and it truly makes my day. I'm an immigration inspector in an Asian country. I'm not a cop, but we do a lot of similar work. I work at one of the biggest airports in the country. I was recently working a line for residents of the country returning from travel when a man a few removed from the front of the line caught my attention. This man was incredibly thin, looked to be in his 30s, and if I'm being honest, he didn't really look like somebody that would call this country home. My first impression was that he was super unkempt, dressed in tattered clothes, seemingly hyperactive, moving around a lot, maybe even a bit paranoid, talking a million miles a minute, giggling at himself, super in-your-face friendly, something that by itself isn't only unsettling. It's a bit suspicious in my line of work. To add to it, his travel companion was a non-native female who looked to be no older than 15. She was the apparent opposite of him in every way. Well-dressed, silent, stiff and still, extremely tense, no emotion. That's already sketchy enough. So, in accordance with our human trafficking recognition and reaction guidelines, we separate them. Since I was the primary inspector, that was my job. I determined the best course of action is sending them to our investigatory area's waiting room, getting police present to help separate the girl to bring her to our safety room and get him into an interview as well. The first part of the plan went perfectly, but when I went to lead him to our interview area, that's when his demeanor completely changed. He went from an excited, hyperactive anxiety to a much more calm, seemingly angry state. Originally, he was making large dramatic hand movements, talking loudly, but now he was just quickly glaring at me and then muttering to himself. We get him seated and situated. I describe the situation to my supervisor, and I come back with a partner to start my interview with him. I introduce both myself and my partner, and we start asking the typical immigration questions. Why are you here? Where are you going? What do you plan to do while here? How long will you be staying? For everything that I asked, he had vague answers, a lot of which didn't make sense. He was here for business. He was good in a nearby city, but couldn't name where. He had a business conference, but couldn't explain his profession. And this was all on a one-way ticket. He also stated unprompted that that girl was his daughter. We went over to the safety room that the girl was being interviewed in, and she stated to the interviewer through a translator that the guy was her boyfriend. She also stated that he promised her money, travel, gifts, all in exchange for sex. He was detained by our on-site police and placed in our holding cells pending an investigation. While we were searching his possessions, we were notified that he offered the equivalent of $500,000 in cash as a bribe to an officer to secure his release. Through the course of our investigation, we found a total of $850,000 exactly undeclared in a secret compartment in his luggage. The judge then approved a seizure of his electronics, and the National Police Electronics Crime Lab found 18 gigabytes of photographic and videographic CP, some of which included the girl that we had in custody. This all happened a few months back. As of a few days ago, he was charged with indefinite confinement to a prison or rehabilitation facility with possibility of release. This was brought down from no possibility of release after he's cooperated with police and led to 3 more arrests. He'll potentially lead to even more the way that he's talking. The girl was taken to a hospital for medical evaluation. She was then interviewed by forensic psychologists and national police officials for another couple of days. Eventually, she was repatriated back to her home country of Greece, where she was reunited with her family. It seems like they're going to get to the bottom of what he was doing with this young girl before any of this makes it to court. I'm glad that we got him when we did, so he can't abuse any other young girls, but it doesn't exactly sit amazingly with me that he stands to get a potentially lighter sentence due to the fact that he's telling on other creeps. I hope that however long he is behind bars, he's made to regret his actions every single day. From everything I've ever heard, inmates aren't typically too fond of those that victimize children. So, a little while back, I started dating this guy that I met on Tinder. For context, I'm a female and I was 28 at the time. He was also 28. He works in finance, and at first, he seemed like a pretty normal, attentive guy. He showed a lot of interest in me. We went on several dates together, and as time went by, we started seeing each other more and more. He'd bring me flowers. He was sweet, and I could tell that he was into me. That part one liked, but I wasn't 100% sure about him from the start because we were different in a lot of ways. Still, I thought, well, I don't need someone who's exactly like me, and I wanted to give it a shot. I was always honest with him about that. I told him I wasn't sure we were compatible long-term, and he said that he understood but wanted to see where things went. After a while of dating, I started to notice he had different sexual preferences. He was really into a particular type of sex, like to the point of saying it was almost a deal breaker for him if his partner didn't want to do it. Now, I'd done this specific sex act once in my life, and it wasn't my favorite thing. I told him that. I said I wasn't comfortable doing it all the time, but I was open to trying it again occasionally. Then he started telling me more about his kinks. He said he was into BDSM and that he was a sadist. He also told me he'd gone to swinger clubs before and that he had a pretty intense sexual history. Now, I'm not new to experimenting sexually, but this was kind of next level for me, especially the part about him being a sadist. What really freaked me out was when he told me there had been times where someone he was with had said, "Stop," and he didn't, but that this had still been within the boundaries of consensual play. Even if that's what he said, it gave me a really bad vibe. Maybe I'm being judgmental, but things didn't feel right. The moment things truly unraveled happened one night that we went out for drinks. He rarely drank. I'd only seen him have a super light drink once before, so it already felt unusual. We went to this cocktail bar, kind of romantic, and started talking just a little bit more openly. I was curious about his sexual side, especially because he had said he wasn't sure where it came from. For even more background, he's adopted and had never met his biological parents. He wondered if maybe it came from something in his past. I was able to gather that he meant traumas and perhaps other things that had somehow affected him. Then he told me that he had a major fantasy about abuse, specifically about abusing others, and not exactly in a role play kind of way. He told me that this was his biggest fantasy. Okay, I've had fantasies about being dominated too, but always from the perspective of being the submissive one, not the aggressor. The fact that this was his main fantasy really unsettled me. He said that this was something he had acted on before, but of course with consent. So I asked him, "What's the strongest fantasy you've ever had?" This is where things really took a turn. He said that in his country, there had been a big wave of immigration a few years back, and he used to see a lot of immigrants living on the streets. He said one day he started fantasizing about taking a homeless woman off the street, bringing her into his home before locking her in the basement, and doing whatever he wanted to her. When he said that, it absolutely shocked me. I'm a big true crime fan. I read Reddit stories. I watch videos on this kind of stuff. But hearing someone say that to me in real life and knowing he genuinely wanted that, that was a whole other level. It felt like I was talking to a serial killer. And the fact that he worked in finance just added to the Patrick Bateman vibes. I asked him, "Wait, but you didn't actually do it, right? Because you know it's wrong." And he said, "Yeah, I know it's wrong, but the reason I didn't do it was because I was afraid of getting caught and ruining my life, not because I didn't want to." At that point, I didn't even know what to say. I felt truly uncomfortable because I could tell he was dead serious. The worst part of all of this is on paper, he seemed completely normal, like he had a good job, friends, what looked like a regular life, and supposedly he'd never done anything illegal. According to him, everything he did was consensual with people who were into it, too. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if he could do something illegal and get away with it, that he absolutely would. It felt like the purge, like if there were no consequences, he wouldn't hesitate. And every time he stayed over at my place, I couldn't stop this feeling that he might do something to me. He even told me he had fantasies about having sex with me while I was asleep. Stuff like that. Now, to be clear, he never did anything without my consent. Everything we did was consensual, and we experimented with a few things. But I still couldn't get rid of the feeling that the only reason he wasn't doing something darker was because of the legal consequences, not because he had any moral issue with it. That was actually really hard for me to process. Part of me felt conflicted because I've had dark or messed up fantasies too. I'm not claiming to be perfect or that the things I'm into are morally superior. But none of my fantasies ever involved doing something that extreme to someone else. They were always about me, not about causing harm to someone in a severe or degrading way. His stories were just so intense. The bondage, the sadism, the whole fixation he had with those themes. It wasn't just something he liked. It felt like it was part of who he was. And even though he had clearly explored a lot of it, there were still things that he held back from doing. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't want to deal with the consequences. In the end, it was a deal breaker for me. I stopped seeing him. It blew my mind that this guy was walking around acting like this sweet, gentle, even kind of naive person. And yet, he had some of the most disturbing sexual desires and experiences that I've ever heard. I've dated quite a few people, but nothing has ever come close to this. Then again, I just want to say he never violated my consent, but I can never fully trust him. That was the main reason I ended things. Funny enough, I was reminded of all of this today because he popped up on Hinge. I guess he saw my profile, and I had a picture up that he had actually taken of me. He sent a rose to that photo, probably as a way of trying to reconnect, or maybe just because he recognized that he took the photo. Other than this one-sided interaction, I haven't heard from him at all since we stopped talking, and I don't plan on seeing him again. But this whole experience is something that has stuck with me, and I just hope that I never actually run into him again. Edit. Something else worth mentioning here. This guy once told me that his friends used to tease him for always dating crazy girls. His words, not mine. He said he always ended up with women who had some kind of issue, like one of his exes had schizophrenia, and many had past traumas or mental health struggles of their own. He claimed that it was because he liked people with depth or stories that he found them more interesting. At the time, I thought I kind of related. I've had my own mental health adventure. I'm neurodivergent, and I thought maybe he just liked people who had lived through things. But now looking back on it and really thinking about everything he told me and how he acted, it wasn't that he liked people with stories. He liked vulnerable women. He liked people who were easier to manipulate or push boundaries with. And I think that he thought he could do that with me, too. He just packaged it all in this poetic nonsense about liking complicated people when really what he liked was a psychiatric history. I think honestly that makes this whole thing even more sickening. So, here's a story from when I was 19. The funny thing is, it doesn't really stick in my memory as a scary moment until I step foot into a caravan. Then, when it gets dark out, that's when things usually come flooding back. So, for a bit of the backstory, my older brother, as dearly as I love him, is a bit of a dipstick. He's one of those people who goes through life on instinct. But the snag is his instincts are generally terrible, and it gets him into a lot of scrapes. Every so often, one of those scrapes ends up involving me. One thing he kicks ass at is driving. Our dad's a mechanic. So, since my brother was a preteen, he's been fixing up and racing a certain model of car. Well, actually, the racing part didn't start until his later teen years. He's never made much money from it, but as long as he gets enough for his cigarettes, weed, and booze, he's a happy bunny. Historically, I've never really gotten along with any of his girlfriends. This is in part due to my own difficulties that I've had befriending other girls throughout the earlier part of my life, but mostly because my brother has a knack for picking not-so-great women. So, when we were chatting buzzed one night, and he told me that he thought his new girlfriend, Chantel, was the one, I decided to drag myself back up north to meet the poor, unfortunate girl. I can be pretty judgmental, and when I met Chantel, I formed a snap judgment that she was no different to his usual fare of crazy. She had the look that he goes for. Permed, platinum blonde girl with huge jugs crammed into a tank top. Her nails, and you can tell a lot about a girl from her nails, were cherry red witchy things bolted on with glue and far too long to allow you to do anything practical. As I entered our living room and saw her, she was pecking away at the screen of her smartphone like a bird, trying to text. She barely acknowledged me as my brother introduced us. And I think the look I gave him said it all, because before long he was nervously chattering away about anything and everything that he imagined we had in common. I made all the effort I could after a 4-hour drive, but she and I could barely hold a 2-sentence conversation together. When my dad called me into the other room and offered me a beer, I all but sprinted out the door. "What do you think of Chantel?" he asked, casting me the sidelong glance he uses when he expects me to go off on one. I belched at him and left it at that, not really knowing where to begin. "You know, your brother's pretty taken with her," he says. At this point, I pull what my family calls my iguana look, where I continue to face the TV, but look at my dad to my side. "What do you want, Dad?" "Well, you could go with him to his race this weekend." I pretty much spat my drink out at that, since his next race was a country over, and I just finished a long-ass drive into town. Come on, it'd mean so much to him. And didn't take to her, and you know what he thinks about your ma's opinion. Admittedly, this should have been a red flag for me. My Nan is like a fucking heat-seeking missile, and she's old enough that she doesn't really give a fuck. Just picture Elena Tyrell from Game of Thrones, but Irish and constantly carrying a pack of 20 Regal in her bra. But I'm sentimental sometimes, and my big brother is such a massive fanny that, my opinion, probably is quite important to him. I'm sure my dad can feel my hesitation, and he presses home the advantage until I'm cramming my luggage back into my car along with my brother's gear and his Chantel's Barbie pink suitcase, which I'm pretty sure is big enough to serve as a viable alternative to the Soyuz capsule. While I probably shouldn't get further off topic, I like to point out that it later emerged the reason my dad wanted me to go so badly was because he had a lady friend coming around and wanted the house to himself. Fuck you, Dad. Anyway, we take the trip up. My bro leads the way while I follow him in my battered old Golf, making painfully awkward small talk with Chantel in the passenger seat as she pecks away at her phone. The first 2 hours are unadulterated hell, but eventually we start to talk a little bit more. And when I mention that I'd recently been dumped by my boyfriend, she actually switches off the screen and consoles me. She makes me feel better by putting some music on, and we bond over a shared love for a couple of bands. By the time we get to my brother's friend's place in Scotland, we're actually getting on really well. The place we're staying in is one of those fixed caravan sites. I believe they're called trailer parks in the US. It's a little dingy, especially since holiday season is mostly over and people are leaving ahead of the site closing for the winter. But at the same time, the setting is pretty beautiful. We get set up inside. Bro and Chantel will get the bed. I'll get the pleasure of hearing them knobbing from the converted sofa. And since the light is fading and Chantel is complaining about not having any service, my bro decides to take her to poker night at the local pub. I stick around at the caravan because I knew I'd get separated from the others and probably cornered for some awkward conversation with a pervy old man if I went. They haven't been gone for much more than an hour when Chantel starts texting me. The penny drops at this point that this is her thing. I don't know if it's FOMO or just generally being bored with her surroundings, but I figure that at any one time, she's likely texting 4 or 5 different people. I don't mind. There's G on TV, and with just my music playing in the darkness, my thoughts keep drifting back to my ex-boyfriend, so I'm feeling sorry for myself. Her texting style irritates me a little bit. She keeps using speech to text, but sending really long messages. And because the signal's patchy, they keep coming through either incomplete or in the wrong order, leaving me to piece together what she's talking about, like I'm a memento or something. She also does this weird cross-eyed tongue-out emoji at least twice per message. After a while, she talks about how the game's getting good and stops sending messages. Right as I'm drifting off to sleep, I get a call from an unknown number. I decline it pretty much out of habit, because who answers phone calls from numbers they don't recognize nowadays? Then almost immediately, the same number dials back again. At this point, I get pissed off. The boyfriend who ditched me has developed a habit of getting drunk and then calling me looking for an easy shag. I decline the call again and ignore the voicemail that was left. A short while later, I'm jerked out of my sleep by Chantel. She's texting again, asking if I'm still awake and if my bro left the keys to his car in the caravan because he can't find them. I say yes and ask how the poker tournament went. She says pretty well. Which caravan is it again? At this point, I'm rolling my eyes, presuming they're drunk off their asses. The one with the model of my brother's car outside. You daft bent. I text back over the music from my earphones. I hear a noise. It sounded like a man's laugh, but it wasn't my brother's. I'm not really sure that's what I heard, but it's isolated as out in this campsite, and my heart's starting to race. So, I stand up and head to the door. I can basically see Gull through the peephole, like it's literally black outside. There's just no light pollution out here. But as I pull the earphones out, I can hear someone crunching around in the gravel. Now, I damn near shat myself when my phone vibrated in my hand. Another text from Chantel. Let me in, X. For some reason, this was the point where my standard alone scaredy-catness turned into full-blown fear. I think it was because the footsteps I could hear were way too heavy and were trying to be way too quiet. My brother's quite light-footed, but he's a loud drunk. And I just know I'd have heard him and Chantel coming from a mile off. Or my brother would have impersonated a werewolf or something that would have utterly failed. He's also like a fucking homing pigeon. And there's no way he'd have needed telling which caravan it was. I looked down at Chantel's last few texts. And that's when I noticed that there was a difference in style. Shorter, capitalized, no derp smileys. I stood frozen in the darkness. I figured that whoever was outside, they were after the car, hence asking about the keys. My mind then ran through a detailed CSI-style post-mortem of them, finding my body, riddled in stab wounds and bukkake-eyed to death. I was wondering if it was just theft I had to worry about when my stream of thought was interrupted by a series of bangs and a snapping noise like a whip. Suddenly, I can see light through the peephole. I'm in full flight or fight mode now, so it takes me a while to lean forward and look through it again. The security light of the caravan opposite is on, but the door beneath it is warped and bent from being forced open. I can see one person rooting around inside, while another stands by my brother's car. Then came the words, "The girl's not here." As usual with me, flight went over fight. Pretty much as soon as I heard that, I went into the bathroom on the far side of the caravan and pushed the window open. I was sure they'd hear the noise I made getting out. First, my shoes squeaking against the fiberglass. I think that's what caravans are made of. Then the crunch as I landed in the gravel. But I didn't stick around to figure that out. I bolted into the raised woodland just behind the caravan. Not far, but far enough that I had to feel blindly ahead of myself in case I walked into a tree. Once I was completely disoriented, I waited. I waited there for a long time until I heard the first crash of another door being broken. And no more than a minute later, the sound of screeching tires. I didn't come out of the woods until I heard my brother calling for me. Even then, I waited until I could see that they were alone. I damn near throttled him when Chantel told me he'd been bragging all night about how he was going to use his poker winnings to buy new brakes for the car he raced. Being the doting older brother, he was absolutely livid that I stood by while his car had been pinched and not taking his keys with me for a jolly little game of cat and mouse with some criminals in the woods. I have no idea how I got mentioned at this poker night, but I'm very glad that my brother's now wife texts like a child on morphine and that my scumbag ex dumped me so I could mope around in the dark. I have no doubt that played a part in why the caravan I was in was picked second. I wish I could say that this is the first and last time that my brother nearly got me killed, but it's not. Maybe I'll share more one day. But for now, thanks for listening. I was about 9 years old when this happened. My parents had been separated for a couple of years by then, but things in my life had never really been peaceful. Not before this, certainly not after. To really understand how terrifying this experience was, you're going to need a little bit of background. Growing up, we were always poor. Like just scraping by poor. At one point, my parents were trying to rebuild a house in one of the roughest neighborhoods in our city, a spot that was completely overrun with drugs and crime. It wasn't ideal, but it was all they could afford. So, it was either that or be on the streets. The house itself was never finished. It had half-built rooms, bare brick walls streaked with water damage, and mold along with piles of construction materials scattered just about everywhere. The place felt like it could fall in on itself at any moment. It actually sort of mirrored everything else in our lives. On top of all that, my dad was violent, unfaithful, and barely around. When he was, you best bet you could hear him yelling at both me and my mother. Well, one night, pretty much out of nowhere, my mom woke me up after my dad had passed out. She threw a jacket over me and said we had to leave. I didn't ask any questions. I don't know what I would have asked at that point in my life, but we just left. We ended up living with relatives in another city for about 2 years before we moved back. Once we did, we found a small place to live. Somewhere my dad didn't know about. At least not at first. But it didn't take long before he started asking around town, trying to figure out where we'd landed. And eventually, he found the answer. Now, here's the thing. Even after everything, I still wanted to see my dad. I was young, and even bad parents can seem like heroes when you're a kid. I missed him. So, I begged my mom to let me visit. After some legal back and forth, the court eventually granted him visitation rights every other weekend. For a while, that was the routine. He was living with a girlfriend in that same half-built house, and I'd stay there on weekends. My younger brother, who was 3 years younger than me, lived there too. He was a result of an affair my dad had with this girlfriend while he was still with my mom. All that stuff, though, didn't matter to me. That was adult stuff. Me and my little bro were really close. We used to turn that broken-down place into our own playground, using the empty lots around it, the busted furniture, bottle caps, and leftover bricks to form our own little adventure land. Looking back on it, I think our imaginations are the only thing that saved us from realizing just how bleak that place really was. My dad always liked to talk big. He'd say things like he was going to win my mom back, or that I had to make sure no other man ever got close to her. I didn't know what to think about that. Part of me still wanted that fairy tale ending with some picture-perfect family reunion. Although I think I knew better. That wasn't going to happen. My dad barely took care of me while I was there with him. Most of the time I spent with my brother or his girlfriend while he came and went like he pleased. I think even at that young age, I knew my dad didn't want to care for anyone except for himself. Well, one weekend, things were starting to wind down. It was almost time for him to take me back home to my mom. But instead of sticking to the usual plan, he suddenly barked at his girlfriend and my brother to leave the house. I think this sort of surprised her since she tried to argue, but he shouted until she backed down and eventually left, dragging my brother with her. That when my dad told me that we were going somewhere else. We ended up walking down the steep hill that the house sat on and ended up at a woman's house that I'd never seen before. My dad acted casual, introduced us like it was no big deal, said that I'd be staying with this woman for a little while. Now, that was strange enough, but before I could think to ask anything, the woman smiled warmly, disappeared into her kitchen, and came back with a big glass of chocolate milk, which at that time was my favorite. I drank it without hesitating, but within minutes, everything started to blur. I got so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. Then, I assumed that I fell asleep. Once I came to, I was back at my dad's house. The entire scene was chaos. My mom was there crying, screaming, completely hysterical. My dad stood in front of her panicking and pleading, repeating the same line over and over. "Don't do this. Don't do this." I think I heard that line 10, maybe 20 times before my mom scooped me up like I was still a toddler and carried me outside. It was clearly late. The streets were all empty, but she kept going. She carried me all the way to a bus stop where we waited for what I believe was the last bus of the night to take us home. I didn't fully understand what had happened until years later. My father had kidnapped me. Instead of bringing me back like he was supposed to, he took me to another woman's house who happened to be one of his mistresses and advised her to drug me. He then left and showed up alone at the meeting spot. Told my mom she'd never see me again unless she agreed to take him back. Then he left her there with no answers and no way to find her son. My mom completely lost it. She ran to his house screaming for him, but he wasn't there, so she waited on his doorstep. Once he finally came back, she didn't beg. She didn't cry. She looked him straight in the eye and threatened to go to the cops if he didn't take her to me right then and there. To this day, I don't know why she didn't do that immediately, but I don't believe that she was bluffing. And I don't think he thought she was bluffing either. He believed her. She was screaming loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. And I think it took that exact scene to pound into his head what the consequences would be if she didn't get her son back. That's what made him crack. So he went back, got me, and brought me to my mother. I think that's when I woke up. That's when I saw her shaking, crying, and somehow still strong enough to carry me right out of that nightmare. I think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. About the alternate reality where my dad's plan actually worked, about how he made me vanish just to coerce my mother back into a relationship with him. But then I'm snapped back to reality, and I think about how even in the face of something truly horrifying, my mom didn't flinch. She just came for me. After that night, and for many years to come, I stopped seeing my dad as anything to me. Certainly not a hero. That spot was reserved all for my mom. I can't discount the bravery that it took for her to flash on my dad the way that she did. And I'm truly grateful for the lengths that she went through just to get me back. I was about 25 years old when this happened. At the time, I was working at this small coffee and dessert shop tucked away in a quiet corner of our city. It wasn't the kind of place that got much foot traffic. Honestly, half the time, people didn't even realize it was there. So when I worked early shifts, it was just me alone for the first few hours until the lunch crowd slowly trickled in. One morning, a man walked in by himself, and right away I recognized him. He had been there just the night before with what looked like his family, a wife, 2 adult kids. At least that's who I think they were. That was the only time I'd ever seen him before this, and nothing really stood out then. But now, seeing him alone and this early in the day, he had a pronounced vibe about him. He approached the counter, started talking to me right away, just casual small talk at first, in addition to making his order. Usual stuff like how quiet the place was. Did I have any favorite desserts? The weather? All typical things. But every second or third topic, he would circle back to how young I looked. He kept repeating that I didn't look a day over 18, which made me uncomfortable, especially after the third or fourth time hearing it. That's when he started talking about how he could help me out. He said that he had a job connect and could get me hired at a place where I'd make $7 more an hour than what I was making now. At first, I was kind of intrigued. I mean, who wouldn't be? I was barely getting by, and any chance to bump up my income sounded good to me. So I asked him the obvious. What's the name of the company? Where is it? But instead of giving me a straight answer, he'd just smile and move on to another subject. Kept rambling about how he knew the hiring manager, how they'd love me, how I wouldn't even need to apply. Just show up and I'd be good to go. Already a slightly odd conversation, but it only got weirder when he started talking about his personal life. Unprompted and basically out of nowhere, he told me he cheats on his wife regularly. Like just flat out, said it like we were old friends or something. Said she knew about it and was fine with it. Then he launched into this whole story about a 19-year-old girl that he'd had an affair with and how now she's married and apparently still thanks him for all that he taught her. I didn't even know how to respond to this. I remember trying to smile politely, all the while internally screaming for this man to just go away. While this was happening, a car drove by outside and someone waved at him through the glass door. He waved back and told me that he knew everyone in the area. It felt like he was trying to flex or prove something to me, but the whole thing just made me feel slimy, like he was trying really hard to make himself seem connected or trustworthy. But all it did was make him seem more shady. The entire time, he kept pushing this job thing. Said I should follow him after work, and he'd take me to the place and get me in. I told him I couldn't because my car was in the shop and my sister would be picking me up. He kept pushing, though, asking me again and again. Finally, just to get him to leave me alone, I told him sure, figuring if he thought I was going to go with him, he'd stop pressuring me. But that's when the goalpost moved. Suddenly, he was saying I didn't need to drive myself, just hop in his car and ride with him. He said the place would hire me on the spot if I showed up with him. He made it sound like some golden opportunity, but at this point, the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. I wanted to get this man his coffee as quickly as I possibly could. That way, he'd disappear, but that's when he pulls out this wrinkled white sheet of paper from his pocket and says, it's his license to carry. Again, completely unprompted. He just shows it to me, gives me that line, and then says nothing else, as if that was supposed to make me feel safe or something, when in actuality it had the opposite effect. Finally, after more and more of this bizarre back and forth, he finally told me the name of the company. He mumbled it quickly as I handed him his drink, and then he left, saying that he'd be back around the time I got off work. The second he walked out that door, I rushed to the back with my phone and started Googling. I looked up the company, the name that he gave me, the location that he mentioned, and I found nothing. No record of the business, no building in that area, not even a listing for something remotely similar. It just didn't exist. I told my sister everything when she showed up. She parked alongside of the building so he wouldn't see us right away. But sure enough, as we pulled around to leave, there he was sitting in a car across the street from the cafe. It looked like he was waiting for me. Funny enough, I never saw him again after that. I was actually retelling the story recently to a friend and honestly started feeling this deep pit of regret. I never reported this other than mentioning it to my sister. I didn't tell anyone officially, not my boss, and certainly not the police. At the time, I didn't really process it properly. You see, I have a history of dissociation from things. This is due to some trauma that happened earlier in my life. It tends to make me slower to react in moments where I probably should have done something. Looking back at it, even though I was 25, I was pretty naive, more like 18 or 19 in terms of how I understood the world. And now I keep wondering what might have happened if I'd gotten in that car that day, or worse, what had happened to someone else who said yes. It still lingers with me a little that I didn't say anything, and that maybe someone else wasn't so lucky. Okay, so this is hands down the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Just a heads up, English isn't my first language. I'm from the French Caribbean, so if some of the scuba diving terms aren't exactly right, just know that I'm doing my best. This happened last year between Christmas and New Year's. Where I live, it's pretty normal to go scuba diving during the holidays since it's warm year-round. My family and I booked a few dives. They're all pretty experienced divers, way more advanced than me. They've passed several higher-level certifications that allow them to go on deeper and more technical dives. I love diving, too, but I don't feel confident enough yet to go without an instructor, especially if the dive requires decompression stops. Quick explanation for anyone who's not familiar with scuba diving. Once you go past a certain depth, around 20 meters or 65 feet, you can't just swim straight back up. You have to stop during the ascent to let your body adjust to the pressure, or you risk getting decompression sickness. It's dangerous and can even be fatal in some cases. So, the plan was for me to do a refresher dive with an instructor before joining the more complex dives with my family. On the first day, while they were off doing one of those deeper dives, I stayed on the boat with my instructor for a more casual reef dive. There were a few other beginners on board, and I was definitely the most experienced out of them, even if I was still rusty. The instructor decided to group me with one of the new students, figuring I could handle myself well enough. After a quick safety briefing and a review of hand signals, we started the dive. It was beautiful out there. Lots of coral, great visibility. I was feeling more and more comfortable each minute, swimming back and forth between the instructor and the other student. The only issue was that it was a pretty windy day, which caused some heavy swell. Not a gigantic problem underwater, but it meant I was using up my air a bit faster than usual. I signaled to my instructor that my air level was starting to run low. Not dangerously so, but just something to keep in mind. He gave me the thumbs up, meaning he understood. That's when things took a turn. A man that I didn't recognize swam up to me. Full gear. Seemed like he knew what he was doing, but I hadn't seen him on the boat. Still, I figured maybe I just missed him earlier. And that's when he signaled to me that he was out of air. Now, in scuba diving, when someone gives you the out-of-air signal, there's no time to hesitate. You hand them your backup regulator, sometimes called the octopus, and let them breathe from your tank until things are under control. That's exactly what I did. He took my spare regulator and started breathing from it. Once he seemed calm, I gestured that we should head over to my instructor, but he shook his head and motioned for us to ascend right away. I mean, technically it made sense. I was low on air, and if he really had no air at all, surfacing was urgent. But I didn't like the way that he was acting. It would have taken 30 seconds to alert the instructor and have him guide us up safely. But the guy kept insisting we go up, and now I was starting to get nervous. By this point, my instructor had noticed, and he was now swimming towards us. That's when this guy suddenly let go of the regulator and swam off, still using his own breathing device. I was completely thrown off. Why would someone pretend to be out of air, use mine, and then just swim away like that? Back on the surface, I was so seasick and disoriented from the waves that I didn't even bring it up right away. But later on the boat ride back, I finally asked my instructor if he knew what that was about. He just shrugged and said maybe the guy got separated from his own group and needed a moment to calm down. When I said, "Okay, but why did he signal that he was out of air?" The instructor told me I must have misunderstood. But I didn't buy that. I know what the out-of-air signal looks like, but whatever. I'll let it go. The next day, I was diving again. This time with a different instructor, a woman named Charlie. I felt a lot more at ease, and eventually I told her the whole story and asked if she knew the guy. I described him and she smiled and said, "Oh, that's just Marvin. He's training to become an instructor. When he has a day off from the restaurant he works at, we drop him off at the reef in the morning and pick him up in the afternoon. Don't worry, though. He's harmless." That made me feel a bit better. I figured maybe we just had a misunderstanding like my initial instructor had intimated. The rest of the week was amazing. I did more challenging dives, started feeling more confident in myself, and I didn't see Marvin again. That is until New Year's Eve. We had planned our final dive of the trip that day. A shipwreck deep enough to require decompression stops. I felt ready for it. No on-duty instructor this time, just me and my family. Although my first day instructor was going to be diving, too, so I felt even more secure knowing he'd be around if anything happened. About halfway through the dive, while I was hovering near the wreck, Marvin appeared again. He swam straight up to me and signaled yet again that he was out of air. This time, I hesitated for just a second. I didn't trust him, but I couldn't ignore it in case he really was in trouble. So, yet again, I gave him my backup regulator. He started breathing from it. Then he grabbed my arm. I reached out to check his air gauge, but he just pushed my hand away before signaling for us to ascend together. But I couldn't do that. I had already been down long enough that I needed to do a decompression stop. I signed no and pointed to my dive computer to show him. That didn't give him pause. He just kept tugging me upward. At that point, I saw my dad below us, but he didn't react. He probably thought that it was my old instructor with me. My dive computer was now flashing and vibrating, warning me that it was time to start my stop. If I didn't, I knew that I'd be risking serious injury or worse. That's when it hit me. If I let this man drag me to the surface, I could die. I panicked. I started wriggling and writhing, doing everything I could to try to get free. I couldn't scream because just like in space, no one can hear you underwater. But eventually, my dad noticed what was happening. He swam up fast, grabbed my leg, and yanked me back down. In the process of this, I elbowed the guy, and he finally let go before swimming off. My dad and I did a long decompression stop before surfacing. I was shaking and crying when we got back to the boat. I spilled everything to my dad. At first, he thought it had been my instructor and there was some sort of miscommunication, but when I explained, he realized that that wasn't the case. We waited for the guy to resurface so we could point him out, but he never did. The next day, we popped into the dive shop one last time because my little sisters had certificates to pick up. Charlie was there. I told her what had happened, and she immediately looked concerned. That's when she said something that gave me the chills. Marvin didn't dive yesterday. He was at the restaurant all day. He waited on me and my family. So, it wasn't Marvin down there. I still don't know who that man was then or what he wanted for that matter, but he almost got me twice. Once by pretending to be in trouble, and the second time, I truly believe that he had bad intentions. To that diver, I hate that you made me second-guess something so basic, so vital. Because of you, I'm not sure I'll ever trust that out-of-air sign again. And that's not just scary, that's dangerous. This is my first post here, so please be patient with me. I've been debating whether or not I should share my story. So far, the latter has won out, but as I've grown older, I've been reflecting on this moment, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are. This happened about 7 or so years ago. My family and I visited a lake in a state far away from our own for our first and last family reunion. Spoiler alert, It did not go well. Safe to say that the lack of AC during the hot summer month of July, different conflicting personalities, and 3 families in a single Airbnb caused a lot of tension. And it all blew up on the 4th of July. After midnight, my mom got fed up and took me, a 10-year-old female and sick at the time with her, to stay at a hotel. My brother and my dad stayed at the house since they were enjoying themselves and already comfortable for the night. We flew to the state, so we didn't have a car, and even if we did, it most likely would have been blocked in by other family members' cars. After much squabbling about our means of transportation, my grandparents, who happen to live in the same state as us, let my mom drive their car to go stay at an air-conditioned hotel away from the family drama. So my mom and I take off. We drove through the dark, empty streets of this small town for a while before we came across a familiar chain motel that we recognized. Since it was late and my mom had a sick kid in the car, she settled on staying there for the night. Pulling into this circular driveway, we saw a little bit of movement beneath the trees of an island in the middle of the asphalt. As my mom pulled into a parking spot, a man dressed in all camo, smoking a cigarette, emerged from the shadows of the island. And once we got out of the car, he asked, "Are y'all going to be needing a room?" To which my mom responded, "Yeah, because why else would we be at a motel?" It was a little odd that this man, who I assumed to be an employee, was wearing full camo, hat, pants, shirt, and not a uniform of some sort. We ended up walking into the little lobby, which was really just a small room with a computer, a front desk, and a few armchairs. He walked behind the desk, clacking away on the computer as my mom described the room we would like, a queen bed and a non-smoking room. The man nodded, commenting, "Are you two alone?" And I can't remember if my mom responded, but he handed us a key to the room. Not a key card like I was used to at home, but a literal keychain. I thought it was odd, but then I figured maybe it was just a regional difference. This town doesn't get as much traffic as the other popular cities around it, so maybe they don't have the budget or the need for key cards. While I'm trying to work through the key situation in my head, this man is trying to make small talk, asking about what we were doing here, how we were liking the fireworks, things like that, before he then led us to our room on the first floor. Okay, that's not too bad, right? But then he opened our door and let us into the room while showing us around. The moment he opened the room up, the sickening stench of smoke hit us. Even though he specifically asked for a non-smoking room, he started twisting the knob to the air conditioning, turning on the bathroom light, and opening the closet door, showing us where everything was. This was a tiny room, big enough for one bed, a thin closet in the wall, and 2 little nightstands, so the tour was 100% unnecessary. My mom stood outside of the room, arms crossed, almost on guard. I, being exhausted, stepped into the room holding my stuffy and blanket, ready to knock out and go to bed. As the man walked into the bathroom, my mom finally spoke up. "Hey, come here." Her tone was stern, one that sounded like that quintessential mom warning that a lot of kids get when they're in trouble, but this one had a little edge to it. The man came back out and was milling around the room when she repeated herself under her breath. I eventually gave in and went to go see what she wanted. She grabbed me the second I crossed the threshold and moved me behind her. We walked back to the lobby to find a new room that was truly non-smoking, and my mom made sure to stay between us every step of the way. While in the lobby, he made a comment that broke the camel's back. "You two are sure a long way from home," as he rang us up, holding onto my mom's credit card as she looked at her phone. Even though I was young, this comment made my stomach twist. I didn't really understand why. Suddenly, the lobby filled with ringing, the tune of my mom's ringtone echoing off the walls. "Oh, 1 minute. It's my husband," she said to the man while holding up a finger to me as I prodded her. The conversation went something like this. "Mom, hello. Hi, honey. What was that?" "Me. Mom, who is it? Why is Dad calling?" "Mom. Shoo. Oh, are you with Ben? We found a place." "Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess we'll see you there." "Got it. Love you." Like the annoying kid I was practically tugging at my mom's sleeve, asking her where my brother Ben and dad were. Mom shushed me again, gesturing for me to grab her card as she informed the man that my husband and kid are down the road. They already checked into a room, so we're just going to go meet them. I'm still asking her about what was going on since I was confused. As we made our way back to the car, I flooded her with questions, and she simply just looked forward, all the while clasping my hand. I hopped in the back seat, and we backed out, quickly leaving the driveway. And in a nearly cinematic moment, my mom turns to me, finally answering my questions in the most jaw-dropping manner for 10-year-old me. I lied. Whoa, why? Now, I had always been taught about stranger danger and kidnappers, but this was different territory for me, one that most women have to live through every waking moment. She filled me in as we drove, winding through the roads back into town. While I was busy thinking about falling into a smoky and dingy bed, my mom was in full-on panic mode. Her mom instincts flared up the moment he opened our door for us, most likely trying to rationalize what was going on. Once we got inside the room, easily accessed on the bottom floor with a key that no doubt this guy has spare of and one that didn't meet our specifications, she came up with a plan. While we made our way back to the lobby, blabbing about a new room. She had been texting my dad, telling him where we were and a caller. Their conversation actually went like this. Hello. Hi, honey. Are you okay? What's going on? Oh, are you with Ben? We found a place. Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess we'll see you there. Got it. Love you. Cue utter confusion from my dad. My mom's worries were only further confirmed with the man's strange and overly personal questions. The reality of the situation began to set in for me. A little part of me that was still innocent and naive to the ways of the world began to crack. In the end, we found a safer hotel further into town. This one had a pool, and we stayed there for the rest of our trip, later joined by my dad and brother. Now, onto the update that freaked me out even more. My brother and I recently revisited the town with our grandparents for a quick family trip, and we stayed at a house on the same lake where we had the reunion. On our way to the house, our car passed the charred remains of a building, gates and caution tapes surrounding the entire area. My grandma pointed it out and informed me that that was the motel my mom and I had almost stayed at. It burned down in October of 2023. Now, I've scoured the internet for the hows and the whys and any sort of answer as to what happened to this motel, but so far I haven't been able to find any. The name of the place did change from when we first went, but I was still able to find it with relative ease. Let me know if you want to know the name of the place in the comments. I feel like the fact that it mysteriously burned down only adds to the unsettling experience my mom and I had there. After looking back at this moment with older and much more experienced eyes, I'm very, very glad that my mom got us out of there. She has not that I can remember had a sort of feeling like that one since. And I've gained even more admiration for her. I'll never know what would have happened if we stayed at that motel that night, because thanks to my mom's intuition, we avoided that situation entirely. This story takes place back when I was in my early 20s. I like to start it off by saying not everyone you meet online is a horrible person. In fact, I met my current wife online, but the person I'm about to tell you about was a bullet that I'm glad that I dodged. I wasn't really the kind of person to meet strangers off the internet back then, but sometimes boredom and curiosity, as well as the hope of meeting new friends or even a significant other, had a way of steering me into bad decisions before I even realized what I got myself into. I met her off of Facebook, of all places. She popped up as a person you may know suggestion. We had zero mutuals, so in hindsight, I can only imagine she was looking at my profile often or lived nearby. Or maybe we visited the same places frequently, or something. Her profile picture was cute, a little blurry, possibly an old photo, or she may have used a filter, but she looked normal enough, and her name was Jessie. I messaged first, a simple, "Hey, do I know you from somewhere? You're my suggested." She replied with a no, but immediately told me that I was cute and asked if I was single. I was painfully so. Then she told me she was staying in town temporarily. We made a little small talk, somewhat flirty, but mostly just friendly chat about town and current events. I figured she was new here and maybe lonely herself. I didn't ask too many questions, nor did I think too much of it. The conversation eventually tapered off, and I forgot about it for a few days. That's when she messaged me again, saying something like, "Hey, I know this is kind of weird, but I was wondering if you could help me out. I don't know anybody else in town, and I don't have a car. I need somebody to grab a few things from the store for me. I'll pay you for your time." At first, I assumed it was a scam, as most things in this life are, but she sent me her location, a motel on the outskirts of town near the highway, and she offered me $20 to pick up a small list of items from the grocery store and then bring them to her. It actually made perfect sense, since she was about an hour's walk from the nearest grocery store and didn't have a car. It was probably cheaper and more convenient to pay me rather than take an Uber. That was the logic my brain landed on anyway. I'm not too sure why I agreed. It's not like I was desperate for $20, but she was decently cute, and I was a bored single guy, so this would be an easy way to see if she's a catfish. I didn't want to put the moves on her, so I just played it cool. Also, partly because I just genuinely want to be a good guy in this situation. I went to the local Freshco, got her things like a case of water, some snacks, and stopped by a gas station on the way to get her a pack of smokes that she requested. The cashier actually looked at me sideways because I'd already bought a pack for myself about 2 hours before that. Then I headed off to the motel. She met me in the parking lot when I got there, weighed me down. She looked like her picture, a bit more attractive, even roughly my age. She handed me the money she owed me, plus a $20 bill, and asked for the receipt. She didn't tell me her room number. I asked her why she wanted to meet me in the parking lot, which was a stupid question, and she had a pretty reasonable answer. "Oh, I don't give my room number to strangers." I remember feeling pretty dumb for not thinking of that to begin with. She thanked me for the stuff, and then we chatted shortly. She gave me a smoke as a tip. We only talked for about 5 minutes before I ended up having to leave. The next day, she messaged me again. "Hey, sorry to ask you, but could you do me one more favor?" During that 5-minute conversation in the parking lot, we exchanged cell numbers and started texting. She had told me she needed to delete her Facebook profile because she was being stalked by her ex. That was a pretty big red flag for me. But it would also make sense that she would be staying out of town in a motel temporarily if she had escaped an abusive relationship. I didn't exactly want to pry on such a touchy subject. This time, her request was to give her a ride to a gas station across town. She had some sort of prepaid card that would only work at certain places. She also offered me $20 in cash again, so I agreed, but I told her she didn't need to give me money and that I was glad to help her out. So I did. It actually became a pattern. Every few days, she'd message me asking for a favor like that. Ride to a store, pick up a prescription, grab some takeout. She always offered to pay me in cash, and I never accepted the money because I figured she needed it more than me. I was also considering maybe I'd ask her out on an actual date soon. But I had some personal questions that I'd need answered first, and I didn't really feel comfortable asking them, like where she was getting all this money without a job, and about her stalker ex, and why she's even staying here. Paying to stay in a motel every night would be extremely expensive, and she didn't strike me as somebody who just had that kind of cash saved up. I asked once what she was doing living in a motel, and she just said, "It's only a short-time thing. I don't like having roommates." Weirdly, I found myself less and less attracted to her the longer that this went on, partly because I was realizing she wasn't actually my type. And all of the vague secrecy, coupled with questionable living situation, threw me off. I still hung around, though, maybe because I felt like she needed me. She never came on to me, but sometimes she'd brush against me in a certain way while getting into the car or compliment my looks, and tell me I'm just way too good of a guy. You're such a gentleman. There's not a lot of real good men left. Things like that. I never saw anyone else around her. Never saw her talking to motel staff. She seemed like a total loner. But one time she asked me to wait while she ran back to get some money. I watched her go upstairs to her room. She paused at the door next to hers, knocked 3 times, waited, and then went in. When she came back out about 10 minutes later, I asked if she had a roommate or something because I knew that wasn't her room that she went into. She just said, "That's my friend. We both have rooms here now." It's kind of a long story. I didn't push. Still, something about her rubbed me the wrong way after that night. I started to wonder if she was an escort or something and might be using me. I never saw her with any guys, but she lived in a motel. She always had cash. She always needed favors. And then she started dropping little hints. Like instead of offering me money for rides, she'd joke about being extra good company with a winking emoji. I never bid on it, because honestly that's not my vibe. I didn't want to get with somebody I'd suspected was seeing other guys, just not my thing. But I still hung around and helped her out because I felt like at this point we'd actually become friends. This all built up to a final request. She messaged me almost out of the blue one night, after about 2 weeks of not hearing from her. And I'm not talking 8 or 9 p.m. This text came through at like 1 a.m. It said, "Hey, can I ask you for a giant favor? Me and my friend are trying to get out of town. Do you think you could drive us to Toronto and drop us off?" This question actually kind of annoyed me. I think it got to me because she was skipping town without any warning after getting to know me for over a month. I was definitely starting to feel taken advantage of at this point. So it took me a while to respond, but when I did, I asked how much gas money they'd have for that long of a drive, which was about 4 hours for me as a round trip. She replied back with, "What does that mean?" As if she was surprised I'd actually asked for money this time. After a while, she messaged back again. Actually said something like, "Whatever you want it to be, baby. Seriously, me and my friend, you can have both of us. Nobody else is helping us out, and we need to get to the city." My stomach dropped. I was pretty shocked by the offer, and I didn't immediately respond. So then she sent another message. "Don't be a dick. You've been so cool up until now." It was like her entire attitude changed towards me, and she just pulled off a mask that she'd been wearing this entire time. I simply replied something like, "Sorry, I just don't feel comfortable with this. I'm not that guy. I hope you figure things out, though. Good luck." I felt my face flush even while typing it. I hit send and just sat there while waiting for a reply. But nothing would come through after that. Can't say that surprised me, but it did leave me with a feeling that I don't think I could have ignored. I went to go look up her Facebook profile again, only to find that it didn't exist. She really had deleted it when she said she did. She also blocked my number, my messenger, all of it. She immediately blocked me on everything the moment I refused to take her to Toronto. I had zero way of contacting her or even looking her up again. That was that. But that's not the worst of the story. That crazy behavior wasn't the bullet I dodged. I didn't even have her last name because at one point she told me that the last name she used on Facebook was fake because she was trying to avoid her ex. She was just Jessie to me. I'll admit I felt guilty, but more than that, I felt relieved. Something about that whole thing had been creeping towards something that felt wrong. And a few days later, I saw this on my local news. Man carjacked and assaulted an alleged escort robbery scheme. The victim had picked up 2 women from a motel in my town and had agreed to drive them to a discreet location where he says he was ambushed by a number of men armed with guns before he was forced out of his vehicle at gunpoint and beaten. The 2 unknown females made off in his vehicle with the armed attackers. The victim was left injured without his cell phone or wallet and found assistance at a local gas station. That was the bullet I dodged. I contacted the local police. I did a brief interview with them. They said that the number I was texting her on was now cut off and without any other data that I couldn't be of much help. I know that they investigated the motel. I saw the cruisers there the night that I'd spoken to them. But beyond that, I have no idea if they ever caught her or her group of thugs. One thing is for certain in my mind, though. If I'd agreed to make that drive, I'd be lucky to be alive today. This happened back in the summer of 2013. I was visiting Montreal, Quebec, Canada for their diversity weekend, which was basically like Pride, but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at the time had met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there. So my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone that he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday, and the trip was going great. We went out the first night, walked the streets that were closed off to cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also had a tendency to lose my cell phone. So, for about a year prior, I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. You may proceed with the judgments. I just wanted to give you the backstory. So that Friday night, when we went out to a club called Parking, which sadly has since closed, it was another fun night. The music was great, and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club, but would circle back and check in with my friend and our host. And I would also run into people that I knew who were also visiting from Toronto and ended up taking a little MDMA from one of them. I danced some more until I was completely soaked in sweat. Then I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and also take a leak. When I got into the bathroom, there was someone leaving, but it looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because after taking one look at the urinal, I didn't want to come anywhere near it. Once I came out of the stall, I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked to be in his mid-30s, on the shorter side and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo t-shirt and jeans and had glasses. I remember thinking when I saw him that he reminded me of an accountant. Not sure why that thought popped into my head, but it did. I was pretty sure that I didn't hear the door while I was in the stall, but I couldn't be entirely sure, so I just smiled back and said hello. As I went to wash my hands, he responded with a hello himself. "Are you having fun tonight?" I replied that the music was incredible while I was wiping myself down with paper towels and my shirt. "Do you want to do some coke with me?" he asked. Now, this wasn't the first time I had been offered coke in a bathroom at a nightclub. I'd done this in the past and ended up having some good experiences along with meeting some interesting people. So I was already high and drunk and not thinking much of it. So I said, sure, I'd love to. "Thanks. I just live right near here. It's at my place if you don't mind coming over. We can do some lines, have a drink, then walk back to the club," he said. Now, obviously looking back, I realized how very dumb my following actions were. And I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now. But without thinking about it, I agreed and left the club with him. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal, along with what parties I had gone to, how old I was, and my name. I asked his name, but he instead responded that we had arrived. The whole walk felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were heading. His apartment was in this building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the second. You had to climb this long, narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flicked on the lights, and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking in and noticed he had carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off when I noticed that he was locking the door from the inside with a key above where the regular lock went. And in that moment, that's when I started to realize the danger that I had possibly put myself in. I was in another city. No phone. Nobody knew where I was. Now, seeing this person locking their door from the inside with a key, nonetheless, made me sweat for an entirely non-drug related reason. I just thought to myself, I'll pretend that I didn't see that. I won't take off my shoes, and I'll politely hang out for a few minutes before asking to head back. I also thought I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw because I was high. But as I looked around, everything inside of me was just screaming, "You need to get out of here." I went and sat on the arm of the couch. He said I should take my shoes off and relax. I was now able to get a better look at him under the light of his apartment. He still looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was fine, and I was eager to get back to dancing. So he said he would make us some drinks, and then we could get back. The apartment itself looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open floor plan with the living room beside the kitchen, and then a hallway in the middle with closed doors painted black. And I could hear music coming from behind one of the doors. I asked him if someone else was there as he came from the kitchen with the glass, and he replied, "No." As he handed me my glass, he looked me up and down. I wasn't wearing a shirt at this point, appropriate attire for where we were clubbing. He said with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face, "You know, you have a beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some before photos of you before we went back?" Now, every alarm bell is going off in my head, and all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and all of his Polaroids, along with what I'm going to do, because that was such a creepy thing to say. And all I can manage to get out is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say, "Sure." "Excellent," he says. He then tells me to take off my shoes, and he's going to get the Coke and his camera and to finish my drink. He walked down the hall, took out his keys, and unlocked the second door, opening it just enough to slip in before closing it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up. I ran over to the sink and dumped my drink. I put my shirt back on and ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door wasn't budging. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me, "What are you doing?" I turned around, and he was standing at the entry of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck and holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. At this point, I thanked him for the drink, gesturing to my empty glass, but that it was getting late and I wanted to get back, but we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow night. That's when his demeanor slightly changed. He was still smiling, but his tone when he spoke next sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos and I should just wait for my drink to relax me. I said, "No, I just want to go." This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no went back and forth for about a minute, when he suddenly glared at me, put the mirror down, pointed at the couch, and said, "Sit down now." Not knowing what to do or how exactly I was going to get out of this, I remembered that there were other units on each side of us, and it had to be around 2:30 in the morning at this point. So I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, the walls. "Just shut up. Be quiet." He snapped at me as he ran over to the door. He quickly unlocked it, told me to get out of his house before stepping aside. I bolted out that door and down the stairs, skipping the bottom steps, hopping over the side of the railing. I looked up behind me when I landed, and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to head, but I knew that the club was close. And luckily, I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to it, I found my friend in the same spot dancing. This whole incident must have unfolded in less than half an hour. I was so embarrassed about how stupid I had been. And being back in the club now, I started to feel bad that I just freaked out on this nice man. So I didn't say anything to my friend, but I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal. And I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered, trying to make light of it because it was really scary. And it wasn't until years later after joining Reddit and this sub, along with reading other stories, that I started to think about that night more and more in depth. and I still can't quite wrap my head around just how much potential danger I put myself in that night. So, strange man from the bathroom that lured me back to his place with Coke. I'm not sure why you wanted to take before photos. And it scares me to know that there may have been after photos you wanted as well.